couple of issues which are predominantly a little bit similar when you look across. The cost of living, of course, featuring prominently. And we just want to delve a little bit deeper into what exactly this means for what is usually termed as the fragile democracies of Africa. Of course, right here in Kenya, we definitely saw the sights and the sounds of that particular day, even as they were agitating for a couple of issues. So away from the headlines, what exactly does this mean in the African continent? Is it a coincidence or is it a wave? That's one of the questions I'll be posing to my well-able panelists who are joining me right here today. Allow me to reintroduce them. First of all, I'll start with Ken Ambani, who is a political analyst. Asante sana for your time. Karibu.
Asante sana.
It's good to have you with us. And Dr. Patrick Dikir, who is a senior lecturer at the Technical University of Kenya. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Karibu sana.
Asante, asante.
So perhaps let's start with that general question, Ambani, and I'll begin with you. Is this a coincidence or a wave, a rising wave in the African continent, where the opposition or the civil society are taking to the streets to agitate for certain issues that they feel has been neglected by the respective governments?
To start with, it is not a coincidence.
Okay.
From where I sit, I look at it as a response to global issues, because it is not unique and isolated to Africa. It is something that is happening all over the world. The world is suffering from four major issues. One is post-COVID-19, climate change, the war in Ukraine, and of course the politics in Africa.
Okay. And the economy as well.
Basically, the politics affect the economy. The bottom line is that politics influences economy, and the economy in return influences politics.
Okay. And perhaps, Dr. as you come in onto the same question, talk to us about the impact of this peaceful demonstrations, if I can call it that way. From what we saw, were they successful, especially in Kenya, South Africa? Because as he's mentioned, it's not unique to Africa. I mean, France are facing demonstrations as we speak right now. So were they successful from where you sit?
Let me first, if you allow me,
sure,
Rogers, to explain to at least the audience that this is not a coincidence. If you look at history, you'd see that there have been probably three kinds of waves that have taken place so far in Africa. This is the third wave, I believe. The first one is when you were fighting for, of course, colonialists, when you were fighting colonialists, isn't it? This was in the 60s and probably early 70s. And then we had the 90s, where we had clamor for multi-party democracy. And now we have what people are considered to be a third wave, where we are looking at people agitating about delivery of services by government. Yeah, so there is something that is historically obvious in a way. When it comes to the impact, I don't think the protesters were able to successfully get what they were looking for. That's one.
Okay.
But of course, there was a lot of disruptions. You saw, traffic was paralyzed. Shops were in ruins, particularly in this country. Roads were blocked with, of course, boulders and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, true.
Buildings, windows were smashed. People could not go to work. Yeah, lives were lost. Livelihoods were lost, and probably we stand a risk of also losing jobs. So in a sense, these demonstrations have not been good, at least for the country, or even the continent, I would say.
And Ambani, as you come in, is there a way to sort of put peaceful demonstrations on one side and remove the anarchy, the violence that is actually witnessed? Because even as you review perhaps some of the comments on social media, I saw, and of course this is with a light touch, that Kenyans should perhaps borrow a leaf in terms of peaceful demonstrations from South Africa? Because right here we saw a lot of stone throwing, battles with the police, running battles and whatnot. But right there it was more of, you know, singing songs of solidarity as they agitated and made their way to the capital. Well, what say you?
Thank you, Rogers, for that particular question. I think in terms of agitating in this country, we are not yet there. I think because of the apartheid and post-apartheid influence in South Africa, they have matured into knowing what peaceful demonstration is, unlike us in this country, where we believe that picketing and peaceful administration must have a footnote of violence. Because we saw things getting out of hand. It was a confrontation between civilians and the police. I think we almost lost the script, because instead of fellows getting to the level where they would even present their petition, the focus was more on the running battles, which ended up costing this country drastically. And as we say, this is not the first time we are experiencing such revolutions. They are successful revolutions that have taken place, born of picketing, born of agitation. For example, there was a very successful revolution that took place way back in Burkina Faso, Upper Volta, that was led by Thomas Sankara. And you saw within 4 years what he was able to do in Upper Volta. One was to change Upper Volta into Burkina Faso. Two, there were milestones that he was able to achieve, because he was able to change the lifestyles of the Burkinabes to be able to get 2 meals a day. There was mass vaccination. There was the eradication of female genital mutilation. And that way, he scored quite a feat in terms of even bringing women to the political fold.
Okay, that's interesting. And you brought the historical aspect, especially of what is termed as a successful demonstration, leading to agitation of a couple of issues. With the benefit of hindsight, Daktari, what exactly would you term as successful demonstration? Because you've broken down that perhaps we lost sight. We didn't see presentation of petitions to the respective authorities. We just saw the back and forth, especially right here in Kenya. What would you term as, you know, a successful demonstrations? Looking at the previous demonstrations we've had right here in the country, agitating for multi-party democracy and whatnot, what is distinct so that the issues come first and, you know, the push and pull comes thereafter?
From where I stand, I see the success of a demonstration measured using different parameters.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
In the US, for example, when people were agitating for certain rights, women's right to vote, black Africans to be considered as citizens, and everywhere in the world where citizens are airing their, fighting for their voices to be heard, we have seen such revolutions, such uprisings, making a dent and creating some leeway from where citizens can be able to express themselves fully, isn't it?
Yeah.
In this part of the country, we also had, as you said, the uprisings, or kind of revolutions or demonstrations that were geared to creating this country to become multi-party state.
Yeah.
And that was successful. So I think a combination of protests, yes, but not violent protests, might help. Keeping dialogue alive.
Okay.
Making sure that people are talking and communicating the message that you want to communicate in ways that are not antagonistic, that are not, very confrontational. I think that might help. There are other ways, of course, people could communicate. For example, in this day and age, you have what you call social media. This is a medium that is quite effective in terms of roping in all persons to articulate their concerns.
Okay.
It is also a place where you would probably be able to have your voice heard far and wide, right? Without necessarily going out to the streets and shouting haki yangu, right? So there are many ways in which we can pursue particular agendas without necessarily becoming too confrontational, too violent. And there are also, I think, a space in which, if we are to carry out in a decent way, I think the law enforcement agencies may also retreat in a way. I don't think they are that inhuman not to understand that we have concerns, but people have concerns.
Okay.
And if you are able to carry ourselves in a humane way, in a decent way, I don't think they would be able to interrupt those kinds of protests. We can, for example, go to the streets, and as we are marching, instead of throwing stones, why don't we get to civil activities, for example, picking up garbage on the streets, or perhaps having some carnival moments on the streets, where you are dancing, you are having people sell foods, you're having people do all sorts of fun activities, where you're not necessarily just out to make a lot of noise and do a lot of confrontation kind of politics.
Yeah, because as you come in, because there are those who actually support the demonstrations, but question the peaceful nature of the demonstrations, hence will decide to stay back and watch from a distance despite agreeing with some of the issues that are being articulated. You can come in kindly.
Yeah, I agree with what Dr. is saying, because most of the problems that bedevil Kenyans cut across the divide regardless of their political standing.
Okay.
When you look at issues economic, the economy is not so good for everybody, whether you are in the opposition or you're in government. Secondly, the issues that the politicians have raised, but they didn't come out properly during these agitations, are issues that can be dealt with, as he says, if people are willing to dialogue. The issue of grandstanding is not helping any of us, because I remember when Musalia Mudavadi was campaigning on his campaign trail, he was saying, we are getting into the last stretch of politics, but whoever is going to inherit this country from Uhuru Kenyatta is going to inherit a dented economy. Whether it was going to be Raila or Ruto, he actually inherited a country battered economically. And I think this is where President William Ruto should borrow a leaf from his predecessor like Kibaki. Because when Kibaki came to power, we had a battered economy. And by the year 2003-2004 financial year, Muraria was able to declare an economic surplus. So I think, with the benefit of a hindsight, the leadership should look at ways and means through which they can utilize soft power to try and catalyze economic production, because making noise does not help. What we should focus on are the skills that we have in this country, the kind of human capital we have in terms of the graduates who are unemployed, whose collective efforts can be channeled towards productivity. And that is the only way we can get ourselves out of this economic
if you allow me to jump in. Sometimes I think we lack some bit of imagination as a people. We cannot use the same tactic all the time. Sometimes you need to vary the tactics, you need to vary the methods of articulating your concerns. If, say, protests do not help, are not helping you, then what next should you do? You must figure out a way of doing so, isn't it? Perhaps a better way, from where I see it myself, is to provide an innovative way through which you are agitating for could be accomplished.
Alternatives, yeah.
So you instead of asking someone else to do it for you, you do it yourself as a way of providing an example to the rest of the people that this is doable. You know, we say, for example, there is the government is not providing good services to its citizens. We are spending a lot of money organizing protests. Why not channel that money into a kind of a pilot project where you'd be able to tell people, this is the way I see the nation needs to be moving in this direction.
I can give an example.
Yeah, and even as you come in, because you're a political analyst, let's bring that home. Right here in Kenya, we have two leaders who are taking hard stances due to their respective reasons, you know. And at the end of the day, we see the clergy calling for, you know, exercise soft power, talk to and find a solution. But are there avenues within the law? Because we've had the president mention he doesn't want anarchy within the law. Can the opposition leader go to parliament, agitate for a piece of legislation that perhaps will change the cost of living in this country through the committees? Are there different alternatives perhaps?
Well, thank you for that question, Jesse. Where there is a will, there is a way. It has happened before. For example, in 2007, was it 2007? When we had the grandstanding between Raila Odinga and Mwai Kibaki. People agreed to stand down and dialogue. And it is within the dialogue that a law was crafted to be able to accommodate the office of the premier. It is not unique in this other case. The president himself had proposed to parliament that they should create an office for the official opposition. So these are some of the alternatives that are there in terms of dispute resolution mechanisms. Number two, I think what is leading us to where we are is failure to listen to one another, coupled with this element of brinkmanship and a bit of revenge. Yeah, because we are looking at, when you're in power, this is what you did. I think, to me, my urge will be to my president, Honorable William Ruto, to step up as a statesman, because he's the father of this country. And as a father, you must listen to each and every child and be able to find an amicable solution towards solving the problems that your children may think are affecting them.
Yes. Well noted. And Daktari, as I come to you, because there are various issues around this uprising in Africa. The EFF agitating for, you know, better cost of living right there. Equally, we know of the issues that are being agitated for right here in the country. When you go to Nigeria, it's all to do with the disputed elections. The opposition leader, Atiku Abubakar, you know, mentioning that there was an issue right there. So looking generally at all this, have protests lost steam as weapons of struggle? Because you can give us, you know, a real example of how it was back in the day and what exactly we've seen right now and draw the similarities.
Well, I don't know whether we might say they have lost steam.
They
are still preferred choice of articulating grievances. But as I said, there is a way in which you could vary the methods and the tactics. That will be successful. But more importantly, I think, we need to, as a people, pay attention to the kind of laws and institutions that we put in place and be faithful to the constitutions that we have all agreed to uphold, right? I think much of our problem stems from lack of implementing and following up, you know, enforcing those particular regulations that we pursue. If only we could be a little bit kind to each other and say that we have a constitution, yes, and we need to implement this constitution to the letter. And we need to follow up all the laws that we have put in place and make sure that they're implementable. I don't think people would be having a lot of problems. Much of it has to do with lack of, I believe, political will And I'm glad at least the president, Dr. William Ruto, is starting to believe or to say that he wants to follow the law. He wants to uphold the constitution. He wants to make institutions work.
Yeah.
If he will be able to follow through all that he has promised, I think we'll be a bit in a safe space from where I see.
Okay, and I came across a comment as you come in. It's better to under-promise and overachieve than over-promise and underachieve. So in a case of African heads of state who come into office with so much political promises and at the end of the day perhaps find, vitu kwa ground and different, as they usually mention, how do we approach this? Should we give them time? I had a conversation with a gentleman earlier on who was saying perhaps this protest should have come 2 years later when we have given KK time to actually implement on the promises they made. From a political lens, what do you think?
I think focus is on planning, because I think if the William Ruto administration would focus on planning, as they say, failure to plan is planning to fail.
Yeah.
They would now be able to cut down on their pre-election promises and be able to identify what are the quick gains. For example, we've had a protest that was on last Monday. Mm-hmm. I saw Cleophas Malala trying to cobble up a group that would counter the other group. Mm-hmm. Suppose his group would focus to go and give cheap labor in areas where they are planting food, because in essence that will be driving towards food security. And that is one of the reasons as to why we were on the streets agitating. So it is a question of thinking outside the box and trying to be innovative, because there are issues that the president can handle. For example, if we are talking about Galana Kulalu, we have people in the armed forces, they have the machinery, the knowledge, the know-how. Why can't we utilize that?
All right.
At NYS, if we have to have quick fixes. So there are ways through which we can do this, and that's why I was saying that if we can learn from the Kibaki administration. I remember that particular time,
as we finalize,
there was a kind of grandstanding, but Kibaki exercised a lot of soft power. You would see the way Kibaki would listen to people like Mudaura, and they would be able to manage political issues very well, and they came out both as statesmen.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, gentlemen, I wish we could go on with this discussion, but my director is indicating our time is up. So thank you so much for your input right here. And we definitely hope to see perhaps a peaceful coming out of the masses this coming Monday and Thursday, because it seems it will be with us for quite some time until
we should have mentioned something about South Africa.
As well.
Yes,
we
got the power issues in South Africa and all that. Yes.
Exactly, yes. What the EFF is agitating for.
Yes.
But that's a conversation for another time. Thank you so much for your time, gentlemen. Thank you. Joined by Ken Ambani, who's a political analyst, as well as Dr. Patrick Dikir, who's a senior lecturer at the Technical University of Kenya. We'll definitely have this conversation even as we continue to monitor the state of affairs